Alex just jumped on. Okay, great. So I'm going to go over, it sounds like you guys are relatively well informed on what's going on with the election, but I'm still going to go over the basics for one, just to brush up on your memory so it's second nature, and two, so that everyone watching the recording can know, even if this is, old news for you all. But yeah, so I was actually at the eviction court today, and we have permission from the magistrate judge to be there and register voters. We are able to store our voting supplies in past the security in one of the rooms that they've repurposed for this courthouse at the convention center. But we'll actually be soliciting voter registrations outside of the security, but you're still in the building. So give me a second to pull up these pictures for you guys. But one thing to note is that when we were there today, security was a little bit, I don't know, I don't want to say hostile, but they were skeptical of who we are and what we were doing. But everyone other than security is super welcoming and super helpful. And actually, when I kind of asked if everything was okay with one of the fellows who runs one of the operations, he's like, oh yeah, they're jerks. They're always jerks. And I was like, oh, okay, great. So it's not us. So it's just a personality thing. It's not us. But obviously that means that we just need to be really cautious about how we're speaking to voters and make sure, of course, it's already 501c3 compliant. But knowing that there are folks who are, watching you with a skeptical eye, just make sure that you're not, quote unquote, causing trouble. And when I say that, I just mean to say that, we are, and the reason I wanted to have this sort of specialized training for this activity is because it's a unique stage in someone's life to be even at the courthouse. And so there are some unique realities that we need to be considering when we're approaching people. One thing that was very clear to me nearly immediately was that it's a lot easier and more helpful to talk to people on their way out than their way in. On their way in, they're kind of in a hurry. They're thinking about their court appearance. They're just preoccupied. They're worried about going through security, etc. When they're on the way out, they've taken a deep breath. They can kind of focus on what you're even saying to them. But that being said, we did have a few folks who were like, yeah, I'll be right back. I'll come back out after I do my court hearing. And they did. They would go in and, take care of their issue in court and come back out and check their registration or register to vote. Since you guys, I know, have engaged in some of this work, you know the deal. There's a lot of no thank yous, pretend I didn't hear you, etc. But I was pleasantly surprised with the reception today. It's funny, I was with one of my colleagues who definitely does this less frequently, and he was like, no one wants to talk to us. And meanwhile, I'm like, I think you're doing great. No one has pretended not to see you. No one has told you off. I was like, we were using very different standards. But so remember, though, that not only are they entering a court hearing, but they're also potentially losing their home. These are people who might have walked in with a house and left homeless, which means they're having a bad day, to say the least. And so we need to be really conscious of that and kind of read the room when we're talking to people. If they're crying, if they're frantic, you don't need to talk to them. Just maybe they can see the sign and it says, the voter protection line. Maybe they'll pick up a form, a flyer as you pass by. They can still get the awareness and reminder about voting. But you don't have to kind of do crisis management and talk to someone who's clearly, worrying about some very immediate personal needs. Another thing to note is that, yes, part of this is to get new registrations and new, help people get absentee ballot requests. It's also just to raise awareness about resources and to get people thinking about voting. There were a couple times when people were standing in line and they were looking at our signs and they were like, oh yeah, where do we vote this year? or, oh yeah, I have to grab the absentee ballot. I forgot about that, right? So sometimes it's literally the function that we are serving is the reminder that you need to think about voting. So that's to say that if you leave a whole afternoon and you've got, 4 registrations to show for it, that doesn't mean it was an unsuccessful day. We got 5 today in an hour and a half, we got 5 registrations and we've got lots of people talking about it. That to me is a successful day. I know that a lot of people, especially who are newer to the registration work, can be kind of underwhelmed by the rate at which you actually collect registration forms. That's something we all go through. We're like, wow, this really is kind of a, bat 100, get 3 kind of thing. And that's fine. That's just the way it goes. So we do have a special flyer that talks specifically about voting around like what to do after an eviction regarding voting, so that folks who might be between addresses, it's just a form you can hand them. So again, if they, are in crisis, or if they're just passing by, but they still seem to be like curious about who you are, or, you have 30 seconds to talk to them, whatever it might be, you can just hand them that flyer. And actually we also have the Vote 411 cards from the League of Women Voters, which is a great way, even if they say, yes, I'm registered, you can say, okay, great. Here's all the information with all the dates that you need, all of the ways you can vote, etc. And so that person can move along. I am sending right now pictures to myself from today so that I can show you guys. So when you go into the courthouse, you will enter at the main entrance, or if you don't, there's actually a lot of signage for the eviction court. Obviously, most people that are going to the courthouse don't go every day, and so there is a lot of signage because they assume you kind of don't know where you're going. But so enter through the main gate. Main entrance is the easiest way to find where you are, and it's just right on the left there. It's like an internal security entrance, and let me show you my pictures here.
Is that main entrance on High Street?
It's on High. I think it's like right across from Vine. It's like Vine and Spruce are right down there. I forget whether it's directly across, which one it's directly across from, but sorry, I'm pulling up these pictures so I can show you guys. Okay. So I will show you. Can you guys see the picture of Marcus, or a picture of Ahoy? Okay. So this is what the entrance of the quote unquote courthouse looks like. You can see on the right, they have that metal detector. That's like where you actually enter. Right next to that metal detector, where you can see that woman standing to the left of the metal detector, that's the exit. So you can see Marcus, our volunteer in the light blue shirt on the left, and he is standing just kind of across from the exit and the entrance, so that when folks are walking out, he gives them enough space to be socially distant and non-confrontational, and then he just kind of passively, as they're on their way out, says, hey, have you checked your voter registration recently? Hey, is your registration up to date? And like I said, I was actually very pleasantly surprised with how receptive people were just to getting that question. Did it pull up the second picture with the eviction hearing sign now? Okay, great. So the traffic, this is like just what the actual courthouse setup is. When you walk in, the first floor is the eviction hearings and the second floor is the traffic. The entrance is all on the first floor, so that all doesn't really like affect you too much because you're still dealing with the same entrance. But it's something to note, if you see a big line around the, wrapped around upstairs, that means that traffic court's having a big day. If you see a big line and a lot of crowds downstairs, that means eviction court's having a big day. My understanding is that both vary as far as how busy they are. But that's just something to point out, whether you're talking to a bunch of people who got a ticket versus a bunch of people who are just coming from an eviction hearing, right? It might frame kind of the mentality of the folks walking out the door. So that's just something to kind of be aware of. So you can see right here, this is like if you were to be looking at that entrance that I just showed you, this would be right of the entrance, looking at that entrance from outside. And you can see just a little, and I included this just to give you guys some perspective, but if you can see the couch on the right, how there's some voting stuff on that, that is actually where we set up camp today, and that's my next picture. But then on the left, you can see the waiting line to get into the court. So people are actually standing right in front of the tabling that we'd set up while they're waiting to get through security. And this is what the table ended up actually looking like. All of this stuff is in a nice little box on a table in room 142, which is, I will email you this information so you have it. But that is on the first floor. It is, if you walk through security, it's the third door on the right, I believe. It's room 142. Room 141 is where the managing attorneys set up camp, as well as the help desk, which is right when you enter security. Those folks know we're coming and are extremely nice and helpful. Magistrate Pat, who is who I have primarily organized with, is actually on vacation the rest of this week. So this week, the front desk folks will be the people that you're dealing with. Robbie is the name of the head one. He was there today, but he said, even if it's one of his colleagues, they'll do what they can to help. And so they're good people if you just have a random miscellaneous question. But anyway, so if you go into room 142, you'll see a whole table set up with all our voting materials, and there will be a cardboard box that will have the tabling stuff, and then everything else is just restock material. That will include blank voter registration and absentee ballot forms, which you will take with you. The completed forms you'll take with you, along with a cover sheet, and you'll do the standard intake process for your Columbus-based voter registration events. And Elizabeth, should we go over that, or does everyone here already know how that works, or do you want me to talk about their options?
Sure. So generally, I have people drop off completed forms to my house. On my front porch, I have a big plastic bin, and you can just put the forms in there, and then you can send me an email or a text and let me know that they're in there. I'll be sending everyone an email reminder probably the day before with my address and a copy of this video so that you'll have all the details you need before.
And for this one, because I'm the main contact person, you could also alternatively drop them off at our Cohio office or at my house in North Linden. I will include both of those addresses to Elizabeth and she can share them. But those are two other options if, getting to Worthington is a hike for you. Yeah, within 24 hours would be ideal. We have a 10-day window to turn them in, but we're near the end of the voter registration deadline, and we like to make sure that we don't keep them any longer than we actually need to. So with that, I am going to briefly just go over some of the rules that might come up, as well as just some basic info, so that you guys are ready to go and prepared to field just general questions on voting. So first, just general election information. This is probably not new to you guys, but again, just to brush up. October 5th is the deadline to register to vote. October 6th, early voting begins. It's also the first day that they will mail out mail by vote ballots. So if you did request a ballot, that will be the first day that they actually start putting those ballots in the mail. I don't even have the deadline to request an absentee ballot listed on here because it doesn't matter, because it doesn't work. If you were to wait until the deadline day, you would not be able to actually get it in time to complete it and cast your ballot. So don't worry about the deadline. What you need to know is the sooner they get it in, the better. And we recommend at least 2 weeks for the whole process. So if folks are, mid-October and they're thinking about it, they need to really be ready to turn around that form the second they get it and request it immediately. And then November 3rd is election day. What's on the ballot? Federal races, the president, as well as all of the U.S. representatives. Ohio does not have either senator up for election, so there's no U.S. senator on the Ohio ballot. As far as the statewide races, all of the state representatives, both U.S. and state representatives, have a 2-year term, so they're up every even year every time. And then some state senators, and then 2 Ohio Supreme Court justices. Those are not to be confused, obviously, with SCOTUS, and of course, with the passing of RGB, there's probably going to be even more confusion about that, but this is for the Ohio Supreme Court. And then the local races, you have judges, prosecutors, ballot issues and levies, citywide offices, countywide offices, and miscellaneous other offices. As far as some ballot issues, one thing to point out, especially when you're dealing with folks who might be less motivated, I don't like any of the candidates, a good ballot issue to remind people of is the affordable housing levy that we had on the last ballot, right? So that's an initiative that got money to affordable housing in Ohio. That's an example of something that has absolutely nothing to do with a single candidate running, but it's a pretty important reason to vote. And so that can be a way to shift the conversation from people to issues, which is often a much more productive conversation. Voting options: in person early, in person on election day, and via vote by mail. Alternatively, I just want to make everyone aware that this exists, because it's, one of those things that's rarely relevant, but this year might be more relevant. If someone is suddenly hospitalized, there are ways for them to still be able to cast their ballot. They must submit a written absentee ballot request, and the group to talk to about that and how to navigate that is Disability Rights Ohio. They have a hotline, which I have in a later slide, but they know all of this stuff backwards and forwards. Just generally how COVID affects the 2020 election. We actually don't quite have as much of a precinct worker shortage as we thought we were going to have, which is awesome. A lot of people have stepped up. Lawyers are now getting CLE credit. Young folks are signing up. So my hope is that we won't actually have too much of a shortage, but we are also really aiming to over recruit for that, so that there's not even the risk that, down the road, if people get sick or, change their mind, we're still covered. Increased stress on mail-in voting, increased voter confusion, as I'm sure you all know, and then potential short-term changes, again, as I'm sure you all know. There's been a lot of litigation and a lot of policy and just talking points and drama around the election, but frankly, not really anything has changed in the way of actually how this election is going to run this year. So there's no updated rules or regulations that you guys really need to be aware of, because it's all kind of been a sum zero. It's a lot of people arguing one way or the other, but the sum is nothing has changed. And then, obviously this is just something to be aware of. People have asked if we're going to do rides this year. We have previously, but this year instead, we're going to just be helping local groups navigate their own rides programs. There was just no way to have a statewide vetting process for folks to make it COVID safe. And so we instead are playing more of a consulting role this time and trying to get folks to the polls through, local organizations doing this effort. So anyway, so if people ask you about transportation resources, we'll try to give you that information as soon as we have some concrete information to share. But if someone has gotten a ride from Ohio Votes in the past, we will actually, unfortunately, not be able to offer that this year. For mail-in voting, when to apply, sooner the better. You'll get your ballots beginning in early October. The ballots must be postmarked by November 2nd or dropped off in person by November 3rd. There will be one drop box in each county. Ohio Votes, who are we? We're an initiative of COHIO, the Coalition on Homelessness and Housing in Ohio, and we specifically target low and disenfranchised Ohio voters. We play in the ecosystem, kind of a connector with both other states doing similar work as well as national organizations doing this work through on-the-ground direct service and voting advocates. And so we try to connect those folks to each other, as well as connect resources to people who are in need of them, as well as feedback about those resources to the folks who are providing them. We have a regional liaison model. Elizabeth is our lovely Columbus representative, so you all know her. This is more just to kind of, when you're having these conversations, to be aware of why people might not be voting right now. They might not have registered. They might have gotten turned away in the past, or they don't think they're allowed to. They don't even know who's running or what's on the ballot. They have a residency question. They don't have a ride. They don't have an ID. They just don't want to because they don't see what the point is. They don't know how to vote, even if they want to, or they just don't have the resources, the time, the convenience, the babysitter, whatever it might be. And so that's something to be aware of when you're talking to people. Make sure you're addressing whatever problem that they are bringing up, right? So if it is a problem of, I don't know who's running or what's on the ballot, help them find that information. If it's the system doesn't represent me, well, how does it start to become to represent you? If you become a voting bloc, you are going to be more, the politicians are going to be more accountable to you. If you feel like your opinions don't matter to the legislature, if you're not voting, they probably don't, because every time they cast a vote for something or campaign stance, they're thinking about who's going to vote for or against them because of that position. If you're sitting out that conversation, then really they're probably not thinking about you very much when they're thinking about where to go. And so that's just, I like to point that out, that it can't represent you if you're not participating, right? So it's kind of a chicken or egg scenario there. Something to just be aware of, we do need to be completely C3 nonpartisan. You can register voters and educate them. You can explain what parties are and why they matter. You just can't encourage them to vote one or the other. You can provide nonpartisan voter guides. The Vote 411 website is a great resource because you don't have to worry about any partisanship. It's the league's website. You can't endorse a specific candidate or party. You can't produce scorecards, endorse parties or candidates, donate money, rate candidates on a single issue, or support or oppose a candidate for office. You also can't host a candidate forum without inviting all of the candidates, even if only some accept. So if you have an event, it's a candidate forum, and the Democrat says yes, the Republican says no, and you put on the event anyway, that's fine, that's legal, as long as you actually invited everyone to participate. It's just a matter of not everyone has to participate, they just have to be included and invited in that. Can we pay for postage? It's an open question of law. If you go through our website, MOH Votes, there is an option for someone to get a absentee ballot request form with prepaid postage sent to them. That's an option for folks if they are worried about that. It's my personal belief that it is, and I am a lawyer, so it's not like totally random opinion, but my personal belief is that in the reading of the law, it is legal to provide a stamp for voters because it's not an inducement, it's a facilitation to vote, and it's a service that we're providing as a nonprofit and not receiving a benefit for. But other people could differ, reasonable minds could differ, and frankly, we've got a wild political climate right now, and so I don't want to say nothing bad could ever happen to someone who does this, but it's my opinion that it's legal, so it's really subject to your own judgment. Some organizations have said that's enough for me, I will provide postage. Other organizations have said better safe than sorry, I'm not. That's totally fine. Can we mail or drop off ballots for voters? No. You can return an absentee ballot request form, but there's a difference between the request form and the physical ballot. So if you are doing a voter outreach, for example, us at Eviction Court, we can consolidate all of the absentee ballot request forms that are filled out during our shift and turn them in together, and that's not an issue. But what we can't do is turn in someone's ballot for them. So only a family member can do that. So we cannot collect and turn in ballots for anyone. But can we provide a ride to vote? Yes. And you can also provide a ride to the drop box. So you might not be able to collect someone's ballot and turn them in for them, but maybe you can give them a ride to the drop box for them to turn it in themselves. The only folks that can't help others register to vote are people who have been convicted of a felony after May 2nd, 2006, and folks who have been convicted of a election-related felony, but I would expect that none of you fall into that category. If someone does have a felony conviction, that's fine. They can still participate in voter outreach. They just cannot be handling the forms. But minors and non-citizens can. And it's actually a really great and powerful tool to say, you know, like, I can't cast a ballot, but this is really important to me and you can. So, you know, this is all the more reason that you should be showing up and speaking up. When do you need to put your own name on the form? The voter completes the registration form themselves and signs it. The person helping them complete it doesn't need to put their name anywhere. If you know, and this could be something for COVID related reasons. So we have a box of pens at, actually, let me finish this slide and then I'll talk about the pens. If the helper fills out everything on the form and then the voter signs the form, you still don't need to put the helper's name. It's only when the voter cannot sign their own voter registration form that the helper needs to write their own name. And that's what this looks like. You would basically, you know, put the date like normal, and then you would either print the voter name or write an X, and then you would print your own name underneath. And the reason is that you are essentially serving as a witness that this voter actually intends to register to vote. But something to note just about, you know, COVID safe practices, we do have pens there, and you can just give the voter the pen. So what we did today is we would we have clipboards, we'd hand them a clipboard, hand them a pen, have them fill out the form, give us the clipboard back, and keep the pen. And so that's, you know, a good way to kind of limit transfer. Similarly, you could fill out the form for them, give them a pen, have them sign the bottom, and then they keep the pen. We do have hand sanitizer and glove and masks there as well. I think you need a mask just to get in, so the masks are probably not going to be helpful, but you feel free to take one. But the hand sanitizer is good, so you can sanitize between folks as well. Just some other important rules. So because we're dealing with eviction court, we imagine that the address issue will come up more frequently than most. We do have a handout that specifically is for this eviction court, and it talks about their voting options and their ID options and some of the considerations. But just to kind of go over it now, you have the right to vote even if you're homeless or don't have a permanent address. So if someone is between places, maybe they're staying on their friend's couch, they can register at their friend's place as, you know, for the duration that they're staying on that couch. Same thing with a shelter or temporary program. If they're not really staying anywhere consistently, probably what's going to be the easiest thing for them to do is to register at a nonprofit with that nonprofit's permission and use that address, assuming that nonprofit is nearby where that person normally stays. So like technically they could register at a street address, at a, you know, crossroads bench. They could say, I sleep on the bench at 3rd and Broad or whatever. But that's not going to be very helpful and probably will be a headache and a half to deal with the Board of Elections on that. But there is room in the policy that if you have a nonprofit and they have a physical address, that nonprofit can agree to let the voter use that for the sake of their voter registration address. And then that voter can pick up their mail and or their ballot at that address. College students and others where a permanent address and temporary address might not be the same thing. This is obviously, again, relevant to more people this year. First, and I cannot emphasize this enough, and this is something that poll workers have messed up on. They've messed up on myself personally with this issue. Your state ID does not need to match your voter registration ID. If you're using an Ohio State license or an Ohio State identification card, then that address does not need to match your voter registration. They might ask for additional proof of address. The voter is not obligated to provide it. That being said, we still have undertrained poll workers. They still might try to shove them into a provisional ballot situation. That's when they call the election hotline, or they bring up backup proof of address just to, you know, avoid the issue. Again, hopefully this is something that they're more accurately trained on this year, but I know for a fact that people have wrongfully been given provisional ballots for exactly the state ID not matching. Students in dorms can provide proof of address from their universities, and students from outside of Ohio can use their Ohio address. They just can't be registered in multiple places, so they just need to pick one. And then as far as something else to consider for the ID, let's say that you don't have a state ID, so maybe you're going to use one of the alternative forms. Well, many of the other ones are address specific forms of identification, which means if none of those have your current voter registration address, they're not helpful. So what options you have are, if you vote by mail or vote early in person, neither of those require a physical ID. You only need the last 4 digits of your social security number. So this is a really good option for someone who might be struggling with finding a physical ID that matches the requirements. A misconception is people with felony convictions cannot vote. They can. If you're incarcerated for a misdemeanor, if you're awaiting trial, you are still allowed to vote. If you are in a halfway house, in community service, on parole or probation, you are still allowed to vote. The only folks who are not able to vote are people currently incarcerated for a felony conviction. The other thing to note is that upon having a felony conviction, you're removed from the voter rolls, which means you will need to re-register upon release. So a lot of folks will, if they check their registration, they're not there anymore. They assume this is one of the many rights that they've lost through incarceration. That is something that varies by state. And so it is not true in other states that folks with felony convictions can vote, but here in Ohio, luckily it is. People should be able to get a registration confirmation within 20 days of having received their voter registration form. Of course, we're dealing with a tight timeline, so I always default to just call the Board of Elections if you're not getting a response quickly enough, or if things aren't getting processed into the system quickly enough for you to be able to tell, because you do want to make sure everything's straightened out before deadlines pass and you lose the opportunity to. So most common errors on the form: incomplete registration forms, illegible handwriting, invalid or outdated registration. They just forget to update it or just don't. Wrongly believe they're registered when they're not. And this is especially relevant for us. Wrongly believe that an absentee ballot registers them to vote or updates their address. So what I like to encourage folks to do is, if they ask for an absentee ballot request form, confirm their voter registration is up to date before giving them that form. If it's not, they can turn in their registration form with their absentee ballot request form. Nothing prevents them from doing it. But if they request an absentee ballot and they're not properly registered, or they request it for the wrong registration address, that is going to get denied, and they might not find that out until after the voter registration deadline, which means they might miss out on voting altogether. So you really want to make sure that before people are taking that form, confirm that their voter registration is already up to date. In 2016, NOVA, the Northeast Ohio Voter Advocates, did a study, and they found that 15 to 21% of the low-income voters in Cuyahoga County whose absentee ballot requests were rejected was because they were not registered. And that was significantly higher than other income brackets. I think for folks who made over $100,000, it was less than 1% rejection rate. So this is a specific problem to the community that we are working with and are going to be speaking with. This is just a picture of the form. Something to note: a lot of folks, for whatever reason, their eyes will skip the top box, US citizen and 18 years old. This is also a good tool if you're not sure about either of these questions for someone. You can kind of use the form as a quote unquote cover. I had someone just today, I asked them if their registration was up to date, and they said, no, I'm not eligible. And it was clear from context that that was an immigration status issue. But maybe someone doesn't know and they don't figure it out, and they think that they have a green card and they're legal, they're here legally, so maybe they're allowed to vote. This is a good way to kind of have that conversation without having to have that conversation, by just saying, like, okay, here the form says, are you a US citizen and will you be 18 years or older by the election? Just check here if they're true. That way someone kind of has the room to politely bow out if they do realize they're not eligible, or just really don't feel comfortable, dealing with immigration or citizenship questions. As far as other mistakes, switching the last name and first name is very common. A lot of people will read country rather than county and write USA. So just check that before they walk away. They won't know their zip code maybe. You can look it up for them. Your driver's license or social security number, sometimes they'll leave that blank because they don't want to give that material. But the thing is that that will absolutely not be processed if they don't fill that out. Switching birth date and today's date is a common, as well as just forgetting to sign altogether. And so, you can't write on the form after the voter walks away. So the easiest thing to do is really the second that they hand it over to you, do a glance for all of these different errors. And then, they can be on their way, because it's a lot easier to say like, oh, you forgot this. Do you mind if I write the zip code or whatever in while they're there? We actually did that today. Someone forgot to put today's date, and we asked if they didn't mind it if we wrote it. And that's totally cool. But if they walk away, we're not allowed to write on the form. We can't write on it unless they're present. So it's a lot easier to fix those problems in real time than track that person down later. This is what I said before, just turn into the form at the same time, the voter registration form at the same time as the absentee ballot. Forms must be submitted within 10 days. As Elizabeth mentioned, we'll hopefully turn it in within 1 day to Elizabeth or me at one of our drop-off sites. And then I used the free Wi-Fi today to look up folks' registration. It was a little slow, so I might encourage people, if they have a hotspot, to take advantage of that, or if they have free data, they can use cell data. There is free internet, but the speed definitely does leave something to be desired. If you don't mind, that's okay. I honestly didn't have to check that many today. There were a lot more people who absolutely knew that they weren't registered, or just really wanted information on dates and stuff and weren't interested in looking at their registration. This is a picture of what you'll see when you go to the website. It's meant to be a very simple interface designed to quickly load, hopefully on smartphones and such, so people can quickly check their registration. It'll cross-check with similar names, so John without an H, John with an H. And they can also, if they'd like, sign up for voting reminders by putting their contact information. These are reminder cards. They're also there. We'll mail them back to the voter. They're less helpful at this point in the year. They're more helpful earlier in the year when, you're 6 months away from the election and you need a reminder. We're a month out, so a lot of people kind of know there's an election happening, and they're probably getting reminders from other people at this point. But this is just something also in our pile, and it is a good tool because they're getting a reminder from themselves. So it's nice to break up the monotony of political advertisements with something in your own handwriting from yourself. Election protection resources. We have some signs with this hotline number as well, but this is like, if someone's having a problem, a question, this is staffed by legal experts in the voting rights field. They can get back to you with the voters' rights. They can correct information. They can also intervene if there's a systemic problem. So, if something weird is happening to 17 different voters in these 2 counties over the last 6 hours, we know something's up, right? And we can do kind of a bigger investigation into more systemic issues. So it's a really great helpline to report and ask questions, but also just kind of register that something questionable is happening, or that there's this issue that keeps coming up. We can find that out from who actually calls this hotline and gives us information. So definitely encourage folks to have that. They have a bunch of different languages that are not listed here. So if you do work with a special population, or if you run into someone at the court that needs a specific language, you can look at 866 Our Vote and get the local language. Hopefully there is an option for that language. This is the disability rights hotline I mentioned. Someone can bring someone else to help them vote. They just can't be an employer, a union agent, or a candidate. Essentially, they can't have power over that person or reason to manipulate that person's vote. Or they can request help from 2 precinct officials, which will be a Democrat and a Republican. And they must have blind access voting machines. They also require either handicap accessible, or I believe everyone will have curbside voting this year. Ballot research, a lot of folks just won't know what's on their ballot or are looking for more resources. Vote411.org is a really great website from the league. Also, Google is your friend. Lots of local papers will write about different ballot issues. That's often a good way to learn about those. Campaign websites for candidates or parties. I always tell folks if an issue is not mentioned, then you probably know something about how big of a priority that issue is. So sometimes you can learn not only what they stand for, but what they maybe aren't standing for. And then also find an interest group you trust, and then find out their support or opposition and specific campaign positions, and let that inform your vote. And I also just want to point out, this stuff works. This is our report from 2018. For example, 18 to 24-year-olds that we interacted with were 20 points higher, more likely to vote. So this is not nothing. These are very substantial margins, and I believe that the reason is because these are people who are not getting bombarded with materials in other mediums, because they are low propensity voters, and a lot of the campaigns target high propensity voters. And so these are people that often are really left out of the information gaps. And then that's my information. Are there any questions or concerns? Okay, great. Elizabeth, maybe we can stop recording, and then if anyone has anything else they want to bring up.